Supporters of populist parties like the Five Star Movement. Another victory for populism in Europe. And yet the Austrian election seems to be a setback for populism. There, the independent, a man who described himself as an open-minded, liberal-minded and above all a pro-European president, beat the far-right Freedom Party candidate. Well, we're joined here in the studio by Douglas Murray, who's a director of the Henry Jackson Society, and from Brussels by Heather Graby, who's director of the Open Society European Policy Institute. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Heather Graby, how do you think we should read both results from the weekend for, I suppose, the future of the EU and the future of populism?
Well, both results are a big rejection of the establishment parties. In Austria, the mainstream centre-left and centre-right never even made it into the second round of the presidential election. You had a far-right candidate and an independent Green standing against each other. And of course, in Italy, Matteo Renzi, who came to power as one of the few centre-left politicians who could still command a good chunk of the vote, he's also been ousted through this referendum. So what we're seeing is a rejection of mainstream politics and a real need for mainstream parties to look at what's driving voters away from them.
Douglas Murray, do you see it as a rise in populism, in a way, however you define that?
Yeah, I'm sceptical of the term populism, which increasingly people are using for anything that's just popular or anything they don't like and want to put scare quotes around. Anti-establishment, I think, certainly. And that is the great mistake that Matteo Renzi made, which was to make a referendum that was on a very specific set of constitutional reform issues, onto effectively a referendum on him, the establishment, the established order, even the EU. And every time the public are getting a chance to kick against that established order, they are taking it. And I think I have to say that instead of, denigrating this trend, one should try harder to understand it. There's a lot of poo-pooing of it, but the public may not be onto nothing. And this is something that mainstream politicians really have to think about.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that instead of saying that this is a sort of that their brains are being stolen by crazy politicians and lying media and so on, we should consider that the public have a real concern. In Italy, for instance, with such high youth unemployment, the public have a real concern. When the Eurozone crisis has gone on, crisis after crisis, they have a real concern. When as many people as were in the Calais jungle that we were all talking about in London the other week arrive every single day on the southern islands in Italy. The public have a concern that's justified about immigration. And again, we see this tendency from the political mainstream, instead of saying, OK, they are actually on something and we're going to do something in response, is either to sort of tweak around the edges of their rhetoric or to describe the people as being wrong, as populist, as people who've absorbed fake news and so on. This is a big mistake in the long term.
And Heather Graby, the term populist, it does tend to be used as a criticism.
It's used much too broadly, and people should really define it very carefully. I think populism is about parties that simply say it's impossible for there to be pluralism and for reconciliation of competing interests in society. They posit a claim that there is a corrupt elite and there's we the people, and these two things cannot be reconciled and that they are fundamentally at odds with one another. And in an open society, that's a real problem, because it means that you can't go for the kinds of compromises and negotiations between interests that are the essence of democracy. So the question is whether political systems can now absorb the new energy coming from new upstart radical parties, some of whom will become part of the establishment in due course, just as the Greens have done in many countries. Don't forget that Van der Bellen, he stood as an independent, but he was a Green originally.
We must leave it there. Heather Graby, Douglas Murray, thank you.
That's all from us. Good morning.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.